Welcome to my video case study story by Molly Daniel. My understanding of the reading process. The reading process may be difficult for many children. I know that attitude towards reading can completely change the student's willingness to read. It is much easier to teach a child that enjoys reading to read. In my case, I knew that KB, the student I worked with, enjoyed reading, so I would play off that while we read. I would ask her what she liked and didn't like about the books we read, and if she had specific books she wanted to read. I also know that students comprehend more when they are making connections in the text to text, text to self, and text to environment connections. What I observed the child doing as a result of my understanding of the reading process. Because I understood that making connections between books helps children further comprehend what they are reading, I used that strategy when reading Yeh-Shen, a Cinderella story from China. I observed that KB has a better understanding of the books we are reading when I asked her what happened in the movie Cinderella that she had seen before. Once she started contrasting the two on her own as we read, I noticed she focused more on the story and was comprehending more as we read. Why I selected the reading strategies I did and how I developed the lessons. To work with KB, I used 3 books. I chose The Little Raindrop to focus on reading fluency because it was a low-level book of which I could assess her reading fluency without difficult vocabulary words. I used When Pegaso Met Mutis because it was a longer book that had a clear problem, solution, and outcome. And this lesson helped KB practice her reading comprehension by focusing on a problem, solution, and outcome while reading the book. I chose Yeh-Shen, a Cinderella story from China, so that KB could practice a book with difficult vocabulary words and a complex storyline, but she could compare and contrast it to a story she was familiar with, Cinderella. Using a compare and contrast Venn diagram was a strategy I knew she was familiar with and a great tool to use to assess reading comprehension. This was a strategy I had used before, but was also highlighted in Literacy Development in the Early Years, Helping Children Read and Write, as a great way to connect text. What I learned about planning and teaching reading. The biggest takeaway I learned is that nothing is predictable and I always have to be ready to improvise. With KB, she got distracted while we read Yeh-Shen. The first day we worked on this book, I had her read to me. When I paused her reading and asked her questions from the text, she started wiggling and couldn't really answer without my help. I decided that we should echo read. I read 2 sentences and she read 2 sentences. This worked well with not only her focus and comprehension, but her fluency too. Ultimately, she did a good job comparing and contrasting once I began making connections between this book and Cinderella out loud while we were reading. She would use the cues I gave her about this book and connect them with the cues she knew from Cinderella, and use the pictures to tie the 2 books together. This taught me that reading a book as a whole and connecting it on a small scale as well as on the big scale to other familiar texts will help students make deeper connections in the text. This was something I learned from I Already Know How to Read, A Child's View of Literacy, when Martin says, when language is whole and used in context, children have multiple cues from which to draw in understanding how language works.